Sean Garrison stretched his legs and looked out the window at the late afternoon image of downtown Pittsburgh a couple thousand feet below his first-class seat. He heard the landing gear of the plane descend. "Mr. Garrison, here's your jacket. Thank you for flying with us. I know you are glad to be home." "No. Thank you, Jennifer. Remember, if you have a couple free nights in Pittsburgh, you really need to check out Shadyside." Sean smiled at the flight attendant. Jennifer was easily 5 feet 10 inches. Most of it legs. The dark blue US Air uniform looked great on her. Her long black hair was in a ponytail that rested just so on her shoulder. Her brown eyes had energy behind them. Her olive skin looked so soft. So inviting. "I think she likes me," Sean thought to himself. There was definitely a difference between the back and the front of a plane, and Sean was thankful every time he stepped on a flight. Food, drinks, movies, and a big, lay-flat seat. His new job was treating him well. They flew him all over the world first class, put him up in great hotels, all to do marketing research. It sure as hell beat working for a sweatshop advertising agency run by narcissistic tyrants. 28 years old and already on top of the world, the pilot slammed the plane down onto the runway. It jolted Sean. "At least we are on the ground," he thought to himself. "That's a military pilot up there," the old guy to his left said. It was the first time the man had spoken in 8 hours. He was wearing a gray suit and a crisp white shirt. He exuded confidence. However, his most notable feature was a full head of thick, shocking white hair. A pair of round glasses rested atop the biography of Teddy Roosevelt on his lap. "How can you tell?" Sean asked. "They all think they are still landing on aircraft carriers," he said, folding the glasses and placing them in an ancient case. "That's interesting," Sean said. "How do you really respond, Tot Hat? You want to be polite, but not so polite that the guy keeps talking, which could make the short trip to the terminal seem like a second transatlantic flight. I heard you describing Pittsburgh to the flight attendant." "What's her name?" "Jennifer? Anyway, I think you are spot on. It's one of my favorite cities," he said, looking at Sean. "You live in Pittsburgh?" Sean asked while powering on his iPhone. "No. I live in D.C. I am just visiting a couple colleagues tonight and driving home in the morning. D.C. is a fun city." "What do you do there?" "I'm a student of history. I read. I analyze. I advise," he said lightly. "I like that," Sean replied, thinking that a gig like that is not half bad. Headed towards the biography on the man's lap. "Edmund Morris Wright, Teddy is my favorite president." "Really? Why is that?" "I suppose it was his quest for knowledge, his desire to experience life," Sean replied. The man nodded in agreement. "Plus, he's a guy I'd like to have a drink with," Sean said with an easy smile. "I second that," the old guy said. The man looked carefully at Sean and noticed a small scar on his neck. "How did you get that?" Sean laughed slightly. "A pretty wicked bar fight. One of the Pittsburgh Penguins slashed me with a broken bottle. You should see him. Not pretty." "Oh yeah?" "No. Actually, I was volunteering at a youth lacrosse camp for years ago and a 10-year-old accidentally slashed me," Sean explained, starting to at his own story and unconsciously scratching the scar. The old guy laughed again. "Accidentally? You know, now that I think about it, that kid was gunning for me the whole week. He really had it out for me." "Could have been something," I said. The old guy smiled and finished packing his briefcase and glanced over at Sean. "I kind of like the lacrosse version of the story." "Most do," Sean answered. The pilot taxied to Pittsburgh International Sea Terminal without delay. An announcement reminded everyone to remain seated, with seat belts fastened, but no one ever does. The jet bridge pushed up to the plane and the pilot released the passengers with the ubiquitous bell. Sean stood up and slipped on his suit jacket. It was clean. It was new. A subtle navy pinstripe number. Made to measure. A suit that fit. He had come a long way from the days of hauling clothes around in a duffel bag and having to borrow a sport coat before a meeting. His legs and shoulders were sore. Probably the flight from France. It is a long way, even in first class. He turned around and looked into the back of the plane. Even longer for them. Everyone looked exhausted, sweaty and dirty, scrambling to grab their purses and laptops, consumed with collecting all of their belongings as fast as possible. Everybody but one. Her eyes were glued on the first-class cabin, but Sean did not see her. Sean turned back around and made sure his new friend could get past him. "Well, please enjoy your stay here tonight," Sean said. "Unfortunately, it's business." The old guy moved past Sean and smiled. "Oh, make sure you get her number." "You certainly have put in the time." Headed, the old dog was probably the same as me 25 years ago, Sean thought to himself. Sean ran his hand through his dark brown hair and headed up the aisle for the door. Jennifer was there smiling and nodded at him. He knew she was checking him out. He felt better than he ever had. All the exercise had filled out his solid 215-pound, 6 feet 2 inches frame, and he estimated his body fat percentage had dropped to 8% or less. He had been eating like a king on the road with no effects on his physique. "That's what constant working out will do for you," he told himself. "See you next time, Mr. Garrison." "Looking forward to it, Jennifer," he said, smiling and flashing his blue eyes. He exited the plane and made his way up the jet bridge. He still had to go through customs, but it wasn't too bad in Pittsburgh. Sean looked to his left as he entered the terminal and noticed that 2 men met the old man from the plane. Both looked average. Nothing special. One took his briefcase, the other handed him a folder. The 3 headed towards the central terminal and the tram. It looked like they were bypassing customs. Sean thought nothing more of it. He stood in line. He talked to the agent, who quickly waved him through. A tall redhead stood 10 feet behind him. She watched him walk towards the central terminal. It was 5 p.m. on Friday. The terminal was full of people coming home from a long week of work and others heading out for the weekend. He walked through the central terminal to the escalators, which took him to the tram that connects the gates with the main terminal. He did not forget to tot out the head of the life-size Franco Harris Immaculate Reception statue located at the top of the escalators. To forget would bring shame upon his home. It is always best to get the farthest tram in Pittsburgh when leaving airport's concourses, since it drops you off closer to the main terminal. He walked onto the tram and leaned against one of the silver rails, attached to the side of the car. He tried not to touch anything. Same with escalator belts. Nasty. Never touched them. He'd rather tumble down 85 pointy steel escalator stairs than touch one. He already flew all over the world with sick, coughing people. He didn't want to pick up the avian flu from a dirty escalator in Pittsburgh. Plus, he had read somewhere that the dirtiest things you come in contact with are escalator belts, hotel television remotes and pay phones. He imagined these silver rails in the tram were number 4 on the list. He avoided them. He had worked in the restaurant business too long. He knew too much about germs. While he thought about germs and where they came from, the redhead entered the car and stood 5 feet to his right. He was oblivious. Exiting the tram, he opened up his cell, hoping his ride was on the way. He dialed Brian Ippolito, his best friend and also his landlord. "Hey buddy, it's Sean. You on your way?" "I am headed to baggage claim." Sean stepped onto the escalator that took him down to the baggage claim area. "Oops. No. I kind of got tied up. I can't do it." Brian said. "You have got to be kidding me." "Come on, man." Sean slung his briefcase over his shoulder and put his foot up on the baggage claim belt. Tell you what, take a cab and I'll treat you to a couple beers later at Doc's. That sounds like a great deal to me. It sounds like a shitty deal, but one I have to take. Thanks a lot. Sean moved his foot as the belt started moving anytime. See you at home. Bailey is waiting for you. You know she does not like to be kept waiting. And with that, he hung up. Bastard, Sean mumbled. Sean's bags were the first two off the belt. He grabbed both bags and headed outside towards the cab stand. The September Pittsburgh air was cool. He heard voices shouting to loved ones, others cursing as they tried to make their way across the street to the rental car center. He heard a familiar voice, "Mr. Garrison, I thought you had a ride." It was Jennifer and two of the other flight attendants, following closely behind her. He pivoted around to face her. She was great-looking and nearly as tall as Sean with the heel sun. Those outfits just always fit so nice. The international flights got the first-team girls. Not the grannies you get flying domestic. Oh, hi Jennifer. Call me Sean. Okay, Sean, she said, stepping closer. My ride stood me up. He promises to pay me back in beer tonight. Oh. She took another step closer. I will believe it when I see it, he said, running his hand through his hair. Do I make you nervous, Sean? Her face was inches from his. She smelled great. She could have just jumped off the runway of an Italian fashion show. Cars and cabs were passing 3 feet behind him. He didn't notice. Why do you say that? You have a tell. Every time I talk to you, you run your hands through your hair. I like it and I love your chin. The little dimple drives me nuts, she whispered, stepping closer to him and caressing his chiseled jaw. Jennifer's flight attendant buddies were clearly not as taken with Sean and were trying to ease her towards the Hilton shuttle bus hum. I think I have figured yours out as well, he whispered. He felt almost drunk when she spoke to him. She was intoxicating. Cars kept passing. A Pittsburgh police car stopped right behind Sean. The blue lights came on. So did the horn. Jennifer jumped. Sean didn't. He knew who it was. Sean, are you in trouble? Jennifer's friends grabbed her to lead her away. The shuttle was leaving. As she turned, she bumped into a woman with a red ponytail. The woman hit her hard enough to knock her off balance. The flight attendant sneered at the redhead who did not stop. The redhead walked to a blacked-out Tahoe and got in. All she had was a backpack. The flight attendant recognized her from the plane. The flight attendants gathered their bags and climbed onto the shuttle. Sean shouted, "I'll be at Doc's." He doubted she heard him. A uniformed Pittsburgh police officer with a shaved head emerged from the driver's side door. It was Brian. He had shaved his head with several other police officers on a dare a couple of years ago. He didn't need to shave his head, he just liked the look. Plus, Sean was convinced it pissed off his girlfriend. As much as Brian loved being a cop, his goal was the FBI. He had sent his application in and was hoping to hear something soon. The process seemed like it was taking forever. Surprise, he shouted, arms out wide, as he stepped up on the curb. Sean half smiled. Brian was a trim 185 pounds, but with the belt, the gun, cuffs and the vest, his 5 feet 11 inches frame looked weighed down and much heavier. Thanks a lot. Did you see what you just did? You ran her off. She thinks I am some sort of criminal. The shuttle bus was pulling away from the curb and Jennifer was looking out the window. You are. Maybe this will help. Brian whipped out his baton and mimicked a striking blow to Sean's head. Sean snapped his hand up and caught it. Jennifer covered her face and looked away. Wow. Great reflexes. I wasn't really going to hit you, but I was tempted. Doe. Very funny, Sean said. Brian grabbed the bags and opened the trunk to Brian's Charger. Oh, I have another surprise for you, Brian said. There's a lady in the back to see you. Not one of the usual tramps you are seen with. Sean opened the passenger side rear door to find his fawn and white boxer Bailey in the back. Hey girl, Sean said, letting the dog lick his face. Bailey twisted and wagged her tail like only a boxer can. Brian climbed into the driver's seat. Sean put his hand on Bailey's collar and opened the front passenger door. Bailey hopped up front. There was really no room with all the junk cops had to pack into cars. Computer. Shotgun. Radio, no. She cannot ride up here with you. That isn't allowed. You don't like dogs, do you? Sean asked, laughing. Not true, and that dog loves me, Brian answered quickly. You talking about Bailey or Stacy? Sean replied. He did not like Brian's girlfriend, Stacy, and was hoping his friend would come to his senses and dump her. That's not nice. She likes you. Bullshit. You need to tone it down around her. Sean ignored the last comment. Am I allowed up here? Sean asked. Technically, no. Fine. I will ride in the back with her. Bailey jumped in the back and Sean slid in beside her. Brian turned off the lights and looked over his shoulder. Well, this looks familiar, you in the back of a Pittsburgh black and white. The patrol car smelled like sweat, and not in a good way. They are black and gold in Pittsburgh, Sean replied. You know you can make this thing right with that flight attendant I was talking with. How is that? Brian asked, merging into airport traffic heading for US 60. You could run me by her hotel. How am I supposed to know what hotel she is in? Brian mumbled. Jesus. Am I supposed to be the detective? She was in an airport Hilton shuttle. Fine. Fine. Now you owe me the drinks. Brian floored the cruiser and took off towards the Hilton. Hit the lights. No, you idiot, Brian answered. Hey dummy. Can you put some music on? Sean asked. Dummy really was a term of endearment. Years ago in college, Sean had accidentally called Brian a dummy in front of an entire economics class during one of Brian's presentations. 35 out of 36 people in the class burst out laughing. Number 36 was the professor. He was not amused. Sean had a special meeting with the dean regarding decorum. They had called each other's dummies ever since. This is a police car, Brian replied, looking at Sean in the review mirror. I guess that is a no then. Yeah, dummy, it's a no, Brian said, shaking his head. Within 3 minutes they were right behind the shuttle and followed it into the hotel lot and under the Hilton's portico. Brian pulled right behind the shuttle and got out of the car. Sean pulled the door handle, but it was locked. Brian, let me out, Sean shouted. Brian ignored him and walked over to the flight attendants. Sean could not hear them, but he could tell they were laughing. Occasionally Brian would gesture towards the car and they would laugh some more. After several minutes, Brian returned to the car. Wow. What great girls. They love my uniform. I told them I like theirs. He chuckled and buckled his seatbelt. What did you tell them? Sean asked, slightly frustrated. I told them you were being arrested for being a douchebag, but I was going to release you into the custody of the dog. They seemed to buy it. Brian laughed. But seriously, I told them I was your ride and you are very important and they should try to make it out tonight. If this does not get you laid, I don't know what will. Brian pulled out of the Hilton lot and headed towards downtown. Seconds later, the black Tahoe did the same. Fantastic. You know, your car smells, Sean said as he leaned back in the seat. Bailey rested her head on his lap. Shut up. Brian flew up Green Tree Hill, past the tarnished gold WDV building and back down the other side. He shot through the Fort Pitt Tunnel, which opens up to one of the best views in the world. You can see Heinz Field, PNC Park, and all of downtown. He took I-376 towards Forbes Avenue and the University of Pittsburgh on the way to Shadyside. Forbes Avenue took them through Oakland, past the O and the Cathedral of Learning, Carnegie Library and Science Center. Right past the museum is Carnegie Mellon, where all the eggheads go. Sean thought Mark Cuban might have gone there. He was not 100% on that. Brian took his first left, drove past Egghead Dorms, the Egghead SAE House, and turned right on Fifth Avenue and into Shadyside. Home Shadyside is an old residential area once home to the City Steel executives. It now has blocks of great old homes, tree-lined streets, and some of the best restaurants and bars in Pittsburgh. Brian owns a home on St. James Street, right in the middle of it, one block off of the Walnut Street retail area. St. James is approximately 3/4 of a mile long. It is lined with big trees and average-sized sidewalks. Brian's house is a 4-bedroom built in 1926. Nice porch. Huge basement. New kitchen, and most importantly, one of the few driveways and garages on the street. It was a great house. It even had the good old house smell. Old houses had a smell. Sometimes good. Sometimes bad. Brian inherited the house, stock, and some cash from his grandparents. Brian and Sean were roommates all through college, and Brian let him live there for next to nothing. During their freshman year, Brian's family basically adopted Sean and looked after him all through college. Brian pulled the Charger into his narrow driveway, jumped out, and opened the rear door for Bailey and Sean. Sean looked up at the garage. His beat-up Jeep was in there, alongside a new black-on-black E63. "We going to take the Benz out tonight?" Sean asked, knowing the answer. The car was one step away from a race car. Brian never let Sean near it. "What? The bar is on the next block." "No. We will walk." Brian grabbed one of the bags and Bailey followed both of them to the back of the house. She was not a dog that would just suddenly run away and was rarely on a leash. She followed Sean everywhere. Adjacent to the driveway was a large deck with several pieces of patio furniture scattered about. The kitchen door opened off of the deck. The door was original to the house and full of character. The wood near the bottom right side was worn from years of people nudging it with their feet to get it open. It was made of thick oak. A window covered the top half of the door. Over the years, the window's ancient glass had picked up a wave that all old glass eventually gets. It was amazing it had never broken as it rattled in the frame every time the door shut. It was going to take an act of God to break that glass. Sean walked through the kitchen, threw his bag down, dropped, and immediately started knocking out push-ups. He didn't know why. He just felt like it. Brian came in right after him and stopped when he saw Sean. "What the hell is wrong with you? Get off the floor. Grab a beer and relax." "You're the one yelling," Sean answered, popping up to his feet. "You're acting like a freak. You still have a suit on, for crying out loud," Brian said, opening the fridge. He had noticed Sean's crazy obsession with exercise, but had not really said anything. It was getting to be too much. Sean grabbed a rolling rock and popped it open on the way to the living room. He flopped down on the leather couch. Bailey lay down next to him. In addition to the couch, the room was furnished with 2 leather club chairs, a chest that served as a coffee table, and a couple of random Persian rugs. The staircase behind the couch led to the second floor. The original wood floors added to the look and warmth of the house. Adjacent to the living room was a study and dining room. Off the kitchen were the stairs to the basement. Wow! A new TV. Sean searched for the remote. Brian was one of those folks that had to have the latest TV, stereo, or laptop. Finding the remote, he flipped on a football game. He never could get his arms around college games that were played on Thursday or Friday, although his school played plenty on days other than Saturday. God intended for football to be played on Saturday. Get up. We are going out by 9. It's 8:30. I am going to change. Just wear the cop stuff. I bet we get free drinks all night, Sean said, drinking his beer. It's a uniform and the answer is no. I did not take the job for the free drinks, Brian answered and went upstairs. I can't think of a better reason to take a job. Sean took a long sip of the beer, put his hand on Bailey's head and said, "Come on girl, I'm going to change." Across the street, the black Tahoe stopped. The redhead got out, said something to the occupants of the truck and headed into the duplex directly opposite Brian's house. Sean tossed his bag onto the bed and looked around the room. It was spotless. Queen bed. Dresser. Bathroom. Brian's maid took care of everything. He was thankful. Bailey jumped onto the bed and watched him. He put the beer on the dresser and fished his iPhone out of his pocket, placing it on the Bose dock. He hit shuffle. The first song was Love Gun. Sean nodded to himself as he took off his jacket, shirt and t-shirt. His shoulder was still stiff. He stood there in his suit pants, looked in the mirror and dropped back down and started blowing out push-ups. Bailey moved to the edge of the bed to watch him. He kept going. Sweat poured off of his head, pooling on the hardwood floor. He lost track of time. His arms and chest were burning, but he could not make himself stop. When het revealed, he would go until failure. Brian heard the music from the hall and pushed open the door. He was ready to head to docks. What the fuck? It's 9. Let's go. Brian's emotions went from angry to concern as Sean got off the floor shaking his arms. Why are you doing push-ups again? Shit. Calm down. Sean answered, are you on the juice? Sean grabbed a towel from the dresser, veins popped out of his chest, shoulders and arms. No, I am not taking anything. I just get these moods where I have toe-out and I can't stop. You know that. I have been doing this for nearly a year. Where have you been? Brian leaned against the door frame. I just didn't say anything. Has it been a year? That is not good. Yeah, it has. What do you mean, moods? Brian seemed deep in thought. I mean, I can't stop myself. I have to work out constantly. When I am traveling, I run and run for hours. I run until I barf. I had blisters on my feet for a long time, or what felt like a long time. I have had to buy 6 pairs of new shoes in the last year. I am wearing holes in them. Check this out. He tossed Brian a pair of New Balance running shoes that were sitting on the floor. There were holes worn through the ball of the foot. Brian examined the shoe and tossed it on the floor. Sean shrugged. Could be worse. I could be hooked on smack or something. That's not funny. Maybe you should talk to Michelle. Michelle was a doctor at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, or UPMC, as it was called. She went to college with both Brian and Sean. She was smarter than both put together, and tell her what? I am working out too much? Couldn't hurt. No way, I burned that bridge with her a year ago. I don't think she wants to do me any favors. Just saying. Brian, she does not want to see me. Let it go. I'll hop in the shower and be downstairs in 5 minutes. Brian frowned, shrugged his shoulders and turned to head downstairs. He paused and stuck his head back in the room. And one more thing, dummy. What's that, dummy? Sean replied, "Turn down that fucking music, somebody might call the cops." Brian laughed and walked downstairs. Sean smiled and grabbed the now warm Rolling Rock, walked into the bathroom and started the water. Bailey followed him in. The bathroom had been redone but still retained the classic touches of the original house. It contained an iron clawfoot tub with a curtain, a pedestal sink and a toilet. The mirror contained a hidden medicine cabinet and of course Brian's maid, Maria, had stocked the bathroom with towels in anticipation of Sean's arrival. Neither Brian nor Maria would let Sean pay her, but he found ways to thank her. Last year, he scraped together the money to pay for Steelers playoff tickets for Maria and her husband. Sean stepped into the shower and Bailey lay down on the bath mat in front of the tub, ready for any intruder. 5 minutes later, Sean was heading downstairs with Bailey in tow, wearing jeans, a white t-shirt and sandals. Brian handed him a fresh beer. "How would you like to play lacrosse tomorrow?" Brian asked as he sat down in one of the club chairs. He was wearing shorts and a blue polo. He was one of those people that would only put long pants on if there was snow on the ground. Sean teased him constantly that he should be one of those bike cops. They get to wear those cute cycling shorts all the time. Brian liked cruising around in the Hemi-powered Charger too much to give it up. "I thought I was kicked off the team." Sean asked, sarcastically, "Well, we need a long stick and you certainly look like you can run up and down the field. Plus, I run the club." "Who are you playing?" Sean asked, taking a sip of beer. "I Harrisburg." "Come on." "They hate me." Sean leaned forward, the t-shirt straining against his arms. "Just behave yourself and keep your mouth shut and it will be fine." Brian finished his beer and placed it on the coffee table. "Oh, and don't stand next to me tonight. Compared to you, I have little girl arms." "Whatever." Sean leaned over and kissed Bailey's head. "See you in a few, girl." Bailey followed them to the door as they left and then watched them from the window as they started walking to the bar across the street. A figure in a dark window watched. Bailey growled. Doc's is a Pittsburgh institution, sitting at the corner of Walnut and Bellefonte. It has a storefront window facing Walnut and smaller window and an exit on the Bellefonte side. Inside there is a well-worn bar that is the centerpiece of the establishment. Like any good restaurant, the bar is where the energy or mojo of the restaurant emanates. A handful of tables are scattered through the bar, however most people were standing. In the back, stairs lead to the rooftop bar. 9:30 p.m. It was already getting crowded. The smell of old beer permeated the place. Some like it. Some don't. To those that liked it, it smelled like fun. Like good times. Those that don't like it should not commit Doc's. Early alternative rock married with classic rock set the mood. Of course, Donny Iris played once an hour. It was the law. Sean and Brian went right to the roof bar. They climbed the narrow wooden stairs to the landing. Old buildings have charm, but their charm does not often extend to functionality. The landing was also the home to the restrooms and like any bar already had a line. They pushed their way through the crowd and saw Brian's girlfriend, Stacy, who fancied her his fiancée, sitting at a table out on the deck. No ring, however. Sean doubted she would get one. She did not care for Sean. Stacy was trying to reach 5 feet 5 inches, but never quite made it. She had blonde hair. Not real. Tonight she was sporting a conservative skirt and red blouse. She lived with Michelle, Sean's former girlfriend. The Pittsburgh evening was crisp but not cold. The deck, constructed of wide wood planks, had a few heat lamps scattered about and was framed by old maples that grew up in the vacant lot behind the building. Leaning over the edge of the roof, you could see all the way up and down Walnut Street. "Hey, Stacy," Sean said, doing his best to be pleasant. She was obviously checking him out. It had been a couple months since he had seen her. His travel schedule was crazy, plus she avoided him. "Hi, Sean. You look good. You been working out?" she asked, hanging on Brian, who was clearly uncomfortable. "Sometimes, people try too hard, like a crazy man," Brian said, laughing. Sean looked away and headed over the bar to grab a drink. He leaned against the bar and ordered a Rolling Rock. Like most in Pittsburgh, he was incensed when Rolling Rock was acquired by Anheuser-Busch. He even stopped drinking it for a while. Rolling Rock is brewed in Latrobe, not New Jersey or wherever it is now. He tried Molson for a while, but switched back to the Rock. The bar was a peninsula of sorts, if bars can be such a thing. On the other side were 6 booths filled with people eating and drinking, mostly drinking. He appreciated the nonsense attitude that Pittsburgh was famous for. You wouldn't see this in pretentious locales such as Dallas or Atlanta. People having fun without regard for having the latest drink, purse, or whatever. Casually watching ESPN on the TV, he caught something out of the corner of his eye and looked across the bar. Staring at him was a striking girl with flaming red hair and piercing ice blue eyes that bored right into him. She made his heart skip. "Here's your beer, Sean." "No charge." Brian said. "He's covering you tonight." Flynn, Doc's best bartender, explained. "What? Why does he keep doing that?" Sean answered, taking his eyes off the girl and digging in his pockets for a tip. "Sean, there are worse things." "You're right, Flynn, as usual." Finding a buck, he looked up, handed it to Flynn, but unfortunately, the girl was now gone. He felt like he had seen her before. Something about those eyes. Something. He could not put his finger on it. He looked around the bar for her but could not spot her. He did not have time to dwell on it as his buddies were calling him. Sean made his way over to the table where Brian was sitting. "Brian, did you see that girl up at the bar? The one with the red hair?" Sean asked, sitting down. "Sorry, dummy, I did not," Brian replied, looking at Stacy. "I wish you guys would stop calling each other dummy," Stacy sneered. "We can call you that if you want, or I can come up with another name," Sean answered. Stacy did not respond. "Very strange," Sean said, rubbing his head and grimacing. "What's strange?" "She not throw her panties at you, buddy," Brian quipped. "You okay?" Sean asked Stacy, pretending she cared. "Yeah, just a headache." Sandy sat at the bar staring at Sean for what seemed like 5 minutes when it was in actuality only a handful of seconds. He saw her, but it did not appear he recognized her, which was good. When he reached for his cash, she headed for the stairs, pushing through the crowd congregating at the bathrooms. She could kick herself for being that close and then being spotted like that. "Stupid," she said to herself. Sandy, a smidge taller than 5 feet 11 inches, was one of those people that tried to play down her looks. She failed most of the time. She had the look of a young Olivia Newton-John. She could have been a Sandra Dee stand-in. She was dressed casually, a navy scoop neck t-shirt and comfortable jeans and shoes. Her arms were toned from hours of working out. She was light on her feet. Clearly an athlete. She might have looked like everyone else, but she was not. She was a killer. In job function and attitude, she took her first step down the stairs and felt a hand on her arm. "Hey, Red!" A local who had started getting his drink on way before happy hour tried to spin her around. "Where are you headed?" "Why don't you come over and sit down with us?" he stammered and gestured towards a table full of his buddies. They thought he was funny. He was a good 30 pounds overweight. A bit of his food was still left in the corner of his mouth and he had clearly spilled beer on his shirt. Sandy looked back to see if Sean could see her. He could not. He was back talking to his friend, the cop, and rubbing his head. "Let go of my arm and get lost," she said, jerking her arm out of his hand and heading down the stairs. pushing past those heading up the stairs. Wait. Don't go. The drunk stumbled down the stairs after her. Sandy shoved the exit door open onto Bellefonte Street and turned right. A black Tahoe idled mid-block. Inside were two former Recon Marines. They called themselves Bill and Bob. Both were nearly 6 feet tall, white, extremely fit, but not too bright. They had served together from day one, a basic all the way through the grueling Recon training. They had seen action in Iraq and Afghanistan. They looked like bookends. Both had dirty blonde hair and average looks. They were good with guns, knives, and their hands. They found that contract work suited them and their bank accounts better than working for the Corps. They did not know who Sandy really was, her real name, or where she came from. All they did know was they were getting rich and that they should never, ever, turn their backs on her. They both thought she was smoking hot, but kept it to themselves. The last operator that said something about her was found with a screwdriver sticking out of his ear in a ditch outside of Warsaw. Sandy started towards the Tahoe. The Marine sat straight up. Behind her, the drunk stumbled onto the street, desperately trying to catch her. Two more of his friends were following him. Wait. He reached out and grabbed her arm again, making contact with her left shoulder. This should be great, Bob said to Bill. Sandy snatched the drunk's left hand with her right and twisted his wrist. He immediately fell to his knees and she turned to face him. She knelt down close to his face. Tears were in his eyes. Beads of sweat were forming on his forehead and upper lip. When a girl says no, she means it, she whispered, releasing his wrist and pushing him onto his back with her foot. She turned and kept walking. The drunk's friends ran over to him. You're a bitch tease, he stammered, holding his wrist. They headed back to the bar. Sandy ignored him and kept walking. She had been called worse. The Marines looked at each other. Next time we should bet, Bob said to Bill. They chuckled as the rear passenger door opened. They both turned around as Sandy slid into the back of the truck. She looked at them before speaking. Turn off that dome light. Bill flipped off the light. She continued, Number 2 is up on the roof. I want one of you across this street where you can see both doors to this place. There's a bar over there, Capis. Set up there. We need to take up a position inside docks to maintain a visual. I am going back to St. James. I have the tracker. If you see anything unusual, report it. I will be listening. Always unusual. Like what? Bob asked. Sandy adjusted herself in the seat and pulled a Glock 19 from behind her. She set it on her leg. Bob looked at the weapon. Oh, I don't know. A kill team maybe? You know what that looks like, don't you? If you don't, look in the mirror. You have heard the chatter. We have not made many friends over the last several months. Wake up. If you two don't get it, I will get someone else. Sandy said, placing the Glock back in her waistband. Yes. We get it, Bill said. We are on it. Sandy opened the door and headed back down Bellefonte to the duplex on St. James. 2 minutes later, Bill and Bob exited and took up their positions as she stopped at the corner of Walnut and Bellefonte and looked around briefly before heading left down past the store front windows of docks. Inside, 3 angry drunks were watching her. I say we follow her. Put a good scare into her, one drunk said to the others. Let's go. All 3 got up and left docks. Sandy walked to the corner of Walnut and South Aiken and jogged across the street, turning right and walking past the Old Athlete's Foot. The drunks followed her across the street. Sandy turned left onto Pembroke Place, which would hook up with St. James. Pembroke Place was once the site of some grand old homes, but now was lined on the right side of the street by expensive, but cheap-looking condos. Old trees blocked out most of the streetlights. She was about halfway down the street when she heard a familiar voice. "Hey, Red." She saw the same guy from Doc's, but now with two friends, both drunk like their friend and dressed like slobs, baggy jeans and dirty shirts. "You sure are a nasty bitch," he shouted. Sandy turned to face them. She was as tall as they were and she was sober. They immediately surrounded her, one on the sidewalk in front of her, one in the grass to the right, the third positioned on the sidewalk behind her. They were laughing. They were confident. "Drunk on stupidity. Look guys, just leave me alone and go sleep it off," she said as she positioned her feet, ready for them to attack her. It was safe to say that her hand-to-hand combat skills were above average, huh? "Not so smug now, are you?" the guy she embarrassed from Bellefonte Street laughed. Suddenly, the guy on the right, in the grass, lunged at her. Sandy sidestepped him and grabbed his collar and used his momentum to send his head into the side of the old Volvo behind her. He immediately was out cold. There was a nice head-sized dent in the side of the car. The guy on the sidewalk behind her wildly swung at her head. She dodged, caught his arm and broke it at the elbow. The snap could be heard down the street, likewise his scream. No more tennis for him. He collapsed, grasping his useless arm. She looked up at the remaining man. "What were you saying?" she said. He took a step forward. She extended her left leg and crushed his right leg at the knee, snapping it to his left. He went down in a heap. "I'm calling the cops on you," he mumbled, rolling on his back in agony. She stepped forward, directly over him, grabbing his head by the hair. She leaned down. "And what are you going to tell them? You tried to assault me, but you got your ass kicked instead? They will really like to hear that." "Oh, it will also go over big in jail," she whispered. "If I ever see you around here again, I will kill you." She slammed his head into the concrete, turned and continued to the duplex. She cut across the yard and fished the keys out of her jeans. Looking across the street, she could see the huge boxer sitting at the window staring at her. She loved dogs, but had a feeling this one did not like her. "The duplex you said to be a grand old home like the Ippolito place across the street, but now was a money-making rental. It had a huge porch, but now had two entrances. Sandy rented the entire place, both units. The landlord was especially excited when a beautiful 6-foot woman showed up in his office offering to rent the place for 2 years. He also liked that she paid all in cash, all up front. She opened the old oak door and went straight up the stairs to the living room. The old stairs creaked. She did not turn on the lights. The bay window faced the front of Sean and Brian's place across the street. There was a couch and a couple of chairs in the room. The items left on the wall were from the previous tenants. Calling the furnishing sparse would have been generous. The focal point of the room was a desk with an Apple Audiobook. On its screen was every room in Sean's house. Sandy's iPhone looked like everyone else's, but also contained an app that was not for Sally on iTunes. A tracker. A tracker that tracked only one person. She sat down at the table and stared at the computer, reached up and pulled the red wig off her head. Her blonde hair fell to her shoulders. She had gotten tired of dyeing her hair and had moved to wigs. Good wigs. Not the kind you buy downtown. "I can't wait for this to be over," she said aloud. She looked at her fist and flexed it in and out. She had an adrenaline buzz from the fight rising. She walked over to the old brown couch, flopped down and looked over at the cheap table next to it. On the table was a single bulb lamp with a torn cream-colored shade. She flipped on the lamp. Its pitiful bulb produced little light. A tattered paperback copy of The Fountainhead sat on the edge of the table. She was trying to wade through it. She had read it in college, but that had been a while ago. She reached over and picked up the book, set it in her lap and flipped to the page where she had left off. An old photo in the book served as her bookmark. She picked up the photo and placed the book back on the coffee table. The picture was of her and her father in the shallow water off the coast of California. He was in the water up to his waist and she was sitting on a surfboard. She was 7. Both of them were smiling broadly. She had on a crazy rainbow one-piece bathing suit. His hair was in his face from the waves. Her wet hair looked like it had a little sand in it. She could still remember the sunburn he got on his back that day. He never complained to her. She leaned back on the couch with the picture in her hand. She remembered how she had begged him to teach her to surf. Every day she asked him, "This weekend?" "This weekend." One day he surprised her with a board. She remembers him attaching the board to the top of their old Honda Accord and driving down to the ocean. He spent all day helping her learn how to get up on the board. He was able to get another surfer to snap a picture of them. They had dinner at the end of the day out of one of those wandering taco trucks. She still remembered what she had, a chicken taco with extra tomatoes, cheese, and sour cream. It was one of her favorite pictures of the two of them. When her mother died during childbirth, her father dedicated his life to raising her. Her father was there for her every day of her life. He was the room mom when she was in 3rd grade and all the teachers had a crush on him. He came to the plays, the games, and was there to scare off the boys, something he excelled at. She sighed and thought about how things would have been different if she had just taken the scholarship to Cal to play water polo. She never became a great surfer, but she could swim and she was strong. She might have looked like her mother, but she was strong like her father. She also had his eyes. Ice blue. Piercing, ice blue. She sprouted to nearly 6 feet tall by the time she was 16 and crushed anyone that opposed her in the pool. Cal had a great program and they really pursued her, but she wanted to go to Yale. She wanted to come back to California after graduation and become a teacher and maybe a coach. The decision to go to Yale had changed her life. It all happened so fast. One day she was a regular student preparing to graduate, the next she was part of some deranged CIA boot camp. It was not her choice. She was now as far away from being a teacher as someone could get, with one way out, but to get there, everything had to fall into place for her and she was going to need some help. She put the photo back in the book. She thought about her assignment. She remembered when she was like Sean. She remembered how she loved to laugh and hang out with her friends. She missed that. She doubted her friends would even recognize her now. First, keeping up with Sean had her in the best shape of her life. Second, could she even relate to them? They had jobs now. They had husbands. They had kids. She could speak 4 languages. She could fire any weapon put in her hand with accuracy that would make an Olympian jealous and kill anyone that opposed her with her bare hands. She closed her eyes. She did not want to kill Sean, but if she had to, not far on a tripod was a Che attack for .08 sniper rifle. Overkill? Perhaps. Good from over 1,400 meters. Not that it needed to got that far. It just needed to make it across the street. She was a long way from the classroom now. Sean was fading fast and felt like he was going to fall asleep on the deck right there at docks. The trip across the Atlantic was finally getting to him, plus he was hungry. He had his feet up on the chair across from him. "Sean, you should really get a PD if you are going to wear sandals," Stacy said, staring at his feet. "Gross. Thanks for the advice. I'll pass." "Stacy, leave him alone," Brian said. "Brian, I am heading out. I am beat." Sean stood up, downed the last of his beer and slapped Brian on the back. He neglected to say anything to Stacy. Across the deck, Bob saw him get up. "He's heading out." "Following," Bob said, checking in with Sandy. He put down his drink and followed a few steps behind. Brian saw Bob a couple steps behind his friend, but thought nothing of it. Everybody seemed to be in shape these days. Even in Pittsburgh, Sean walked down the stairs fighting the same crowd Sandy had an hour earlier. It always seemed like the volume of the music jumped several decibels the later it got. He stepped out onto Bellefonte and turned left. A yellow cab pulled up in front of Doc's. Two women, clearly overdressed, got out. Whoa! Look who just showed up. The girls from the plane. Our boy must have made an impression, Bill exclaimed from his vantage point at Cappy's. Jennifer and her friend and paid the cab driver and walked into Doc's as Sean rounded the corner. He just missed them. Stay behind him, Bill said, stood up and placed his beer on the table at Cappy's. Meanwhile, Sean was famished. His caloric intake had tripled. He knew the Pittsburgh Deli Company was still open. He sprinted across Walnut Street, right in front of Cappy's. Shit. I don't know where he's going now. He just crossed the street heading back the other way, Bob said. Bill saw Sean jog past the window. I have him, Bill said, left Cappy's and started down Walnut behind Sean. Without warning, Sandy came in over the radio. Calm down. He's probably heading to the Pittsburgh Deli Company. All he does is eat. You two should know that by now. Bob did not respond to her and walked back past Doc's heading towards Copeland. Sean turned left on Copeland and walked 40 feet down the street to the Pittsburgh Deli Company. The restaurant was located in an old brownstone. Sean took the 6 or so steps up into the restaurant. It really was just a counter and several two tops. He ordered a Reuben off the handwritten board behind the counter, chips and a Coke. He got it to go and left via the tracker. Sandy watched his every step. Sean walked the rest of the way home without stopping. Bailey saw him when he entered the yard and greeted him at the door. Bob and Bill were back in their Tahoe sitting on Pembroke waiting and watching. Thrilled to see Sean, Bailey was jumping and bouncing around the room. She smelled the sandwich. Corned beef was a favorite. Sean placed the bag and Coke on the coffee table. Hey girl. Thanks for waiting up. He tried to pet her head but she was jumping wildly. Sandy watched him from the laptop. Sean flipped on the TV and opened up the sandwich. Bailey sat at attention next to him. He found a nice piece of corned beef without sauce and flipped it to Bailey. She caught it in the air. He finished the sandwich, shoved the bag into the empty Coke cup and then headed upstairs for some needed rest. He pulled off his shirt and let his pants drop to the floor. After brushing his teeth, he opened his window slightly. Bailey jumped onto the bed and he followed her. Good night, girl. He needed to crash. After all, the next day was his triumphant return to the lacrosse field. Back on Walnut Street, Jennifer and Ann wove their way through the crowd at Doc's, finally making it to the roof. Brian saw them before they saw him. Shit, he said, as he started to stand. Stacy looked at Jennifer and Ann as they approached the table. Both were knockouts. Both dressed in black. Ann was a blonde version of Jennifer. Both did this thing with their eye makeup that drove every guy nuts. Stacy instantly hated them both. They both hugged Brian. Now Stacy really hated them. The guys in the bar took notice as well. We made it out. Jennifer exclaimed, looking around. She realized she was overdressed but could not have cared less. You just missed Sean. He headed home, Brian said, emphasizing Sean. Oh no. I really wanted to see him, she said. Feel free to swing by our place. I am sure he's just watching TV. I don't know. Is it far? Jennifer asked, while looking at Ann. Ann was clearly not on board with it. 2 blocks. Here's the address. I will text him to let him know you two are coming over. I am sure the bouncer downstairs will call you a cab, Brian said, scribbling down the address on a napkin and handing it to her. "Thank you, Brian." Jennifer leaned over the table, giving him a good show, and kissed him on the cheek, making sure Stacy saw it, and then turned and walked away. Just like everyone else, Jennifer had taken an instant dislike to Stacy. Brian sat back down. Stacy's eyes were glued to him, arms crossed. "Sean met them on the plane," he said, reaching for his beer and slouching in his chair. "Well, duh. He hasn't changed. I met them when I picked him up at the airport." "I am sure you did. They seem to remember you fondly," she said with a good measure of nasty in her tone. "I had my uniform on. Chicks dig it." He smiled and reached for his cell to text Sean. "Brian, Jennifer and a friend are on their way over. Put Bailey in me room and get downstairs. You can thank me later." Sean never received the message. He was in bed, sound asleep next to a 75-pound boxer. His phone was downstairs between two seat cushions. Sandy did receive a text, however. Her iPhone mirrored Sean's. She was not happy. "Damn it. I should have pushed her into traffic at the airport." She pulled her blonde hair into a ponytail, slipped on her running shoes, took a look at Sean sleeping, and sprinted downstairs. As Brian surmised, the bouncer was jumping through hoops for Jennifer and quickly got her a cab. Sandy ran down her stairs and across her yard. She paused at the street and ran across Brian and Sean's yard to the front porch. The porch was wide enough for a handful of chairs. Two lights bookended the front door. A thick hedge butted up against the porch. "Bob, look. What the hell is she doing?" Bill said, as he nudged Bob. "Hell if I know, and I am not asking. Let's see how it plays out." "Wait, she's a blonde now." Sandy grabbed a stick that had fallen on the porch and smashed the bulbs. The porch went dark. Sandy found a chair and sat down. She waited. Upstairs, Bailey let out a low rumble. "Quiet girl," Sean said, half asleep. Sandy did not have to wait long as a cab appeared at the corner of St. James and Pembroke. It pulled onto St. James and stopped in front of Sean's house. Sandy could see two figures in the back seat. "Relax, Anne. I just want to say hi and I will come back out." "How do we look?" Jennifer said to Anne. "Sure, just say hi. You look fine. Hurry up." "Just wait here," Jennifer said and started to step out of the cab. "Well, I'll be." "Bob, look who just got out of the cab. The hottie from the plane." From Pembroke, Bill and Bob had full view of the house. "This is going to be great. I wish I had that laptop Sandy does. Should be quite a show," Bill said, leaning forward in his seat. Jennifer shut the cab door, straightened her dress and started up the walk. Her heels made a rhythmic clicking noise. She climbed the 3 steps to the porch and walked to the door. She hoped the lights would come on. They didn't. The street lights from St. James only produced creepy shadows. She was reaching for the bell when a figure appeared from the shadows. "I wouldn't do that," Sandy said calmly, walking towards Jennifer. In heels, Jennifer was slightly taller than Sandy. "Why?" "I am Sean's friend," Jennifer said, obviously startled. "I have never heard of you," Sandy said, positioning herself between Jennifer and the door. "Who are you anyway?" "Wait, do I know you?" Jennifer asked, thinking she had seen Sandy before. "His sister, Bailey." "And no, you don't." Sandy smiled to herself. She liked using the dog's name. She felt Bailey would do the same thing if she could. "Well, I don't care who you are," Jennifer said, reaching for the bell. With one quick motion, Sandy grabbed a handful of black hair in her fist and pulled Jennifer's ear towards her face. "Look, Jennifer. Yes. I know your name. Here's what you are going to do. Get in the cab with your friend, go back to your hotel, put on that cute little uniform of yours and fly out of Pittsburgh. If I ever see you again, I am going to grab one of those $300 shoes and cram it up your ass. Do you understand me?" Terrified, Jennifer had tears running down her face, but she still nodded. She stumbled as she ran back down the walk towards the cab. Sandy disappeared back into the shadows. Let's get out of here. His sister is crazy. Jennifer yelled at Anne and the cab driver at the same time. Across the street, Bill and Bob looked at each other. They had seen the whole thing. She's crazy, Bob said. Shut up. She has this truck bugged for all I know. Sandy watched the cab pull away and made her way across the yard, hugging the tall hedges that separated Sean's house from the neighbor. She raced across the street and leaped onto her porch in one jump. Entering the living room, she stood in front of her laptop with her hands on her hips. All this ass-kicking is exhausting, she said aloud. She needed to relax. Bill and Bob had eyes on the house. She walked back to the bathroom. It was not nearly as nice as Sean's. One small window adjacent to the tub. Basic sink. Basic tub and toilet. She reached behind her back and took out the Glock and put it on the windowsill. She placed her phone next to it. She pulled her shirt over her head and looked in the mirror. A thin scar ran under her right breast, across her flat, muscular stomach and down to her waist. She ran her finger over it and looked at herself again in the mirror. She slid out of her shoes and jeans and looked at herself again. Plain bra. Plain white panties. Plain. Guys like plain? Guys like women like Jennifer? She looked out of the bathroom at the laptop and at Sean sleeping soundly next to his dog. Then she got in the shower. Sandy emerged 10 minutes later, toweled off and got dressed. She pulled on a pair of Adidas capri-length tights, fresh socks, a jogging bra and a sweatshirt. She had to be ready when Sean emerged. She knew he was going to start working out as soon as he woke. She reached for the radio. I have the next 3 hours. Both of you get some rest. We all need to be ready to go at 0500. His routine will not change stateside. Don't let the cop spot you. She snatched the laptop off the table and balanced it on the edge of the couch and sent a quick email to an anonymous account. The laptop produced a new address everyday.to 0921201102 @gmail.com FROM 0921201101 @yahoo.com IE #2 no change. Still operationally ready, she hit send, changed the screen back to the camera view and placed it on the table. She grabbed a Greek yogurt and a 1-liter bottle of water out of the fridge and sat in a chair that afforded her a view of the cameras and the front of house. She glanced at the rifle and opened the yogurt. Sean woke up around 8 a.m. Bailey had wormed her way under the covers of the bed, her nose just sticking out of the top of the comforter. Sean lay on his back for a moment and stared at the ceiling, but was quickly overcome with the need to do something, keep moving. He threw the covers off his side of the bed, clad only in his boxer shorts, and dropped back down to the floor and started doing push-ups. Like the night before, he kept knocking them out without regard for the pain in his arms and the pain in his shoulders. Bailey hung her head over the edge of the bed. She let out a huff. Sandy watched on her laptop from across the street. She alerted her team and got ready to move. I hear you, girl. I'll take you out in a minute. Sean popped back up and looked in the mirror. He looked good, but something kept telling him go. Go. He walked into the bathroom and brushed his teeth and rubbed the beard that was covering the sharp features of his face. He was working an East 5 o'clock shadow. Not quite Sonny Crockett, but nice. You know, I should have named you Tubbs, he said to Bailey. Bailey watched from the bed. He came back out into the bedroom and opened the bottom drawer, searching for a pair of lacrosse shorts. He found an old pair from a club team in Atlanta, Pete's Wicked. He slipped his sandals on and went downstairs, sans shirt. He and Bailey would sprint to Starbucks after breakfast. Let's go outside. Bailey jumped off the bed and roared downstairs. Sean walked through the living room into the kitchen and opened the back door for Bailey. She ran off into the backyard. Sean looked in the fridge and pulled out a carton of eggs, cheese and OJ. He placed everything on the counter and took a frying pan down from the pot rack. In the cabinet adjacent to the stove, he reached for the PAM, treated the pan and returned the can to the cabinet. He turned on the gas, the Viking range roared to life. He placed the pan over the burner and started cracking eggs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. That looked about right. Too lazy to beat them in a bowl, headed it in the pan. Bailey pounded on the door and he let her in. She took up a spot at his feet, knowing there was something in it for her. "This is for you too, girl," Sean said, looking at her. Bailey shifted her weight anxiously. Sean added a handful of shredded cheese to the mix and started folding the eggs. He did not notice Stacy enter the kitchen. Bailey did, but did not care. Stacy did not exist as far as the dog was concerned. "Got enough eggs?" she said as she opened the fridge looking for bottled water. She looked him up and down. She was wearing last night's clothes. Brian was right. "You have been working out. You on something?" she asked as she leaned on the counter. Sean kept folding the eggs. "Good morning to you too, Stacy," Sean said. "I prefer to think of it as hard work. I also would prefer it if you two would stop asking me if I am on something." He turned towards her, opened the dishwasher and pulled 2 clean plates out. One for him and one for Bailey. He scraped the eggs onto 2 plates. Stacy looked at the eggs. He turned off the burner. "Sorry, Sean, I don't have time to eat," Stacy said with a fake smile. He attuned the fake smile as he put one of the plates on the floor. "They aren't for you," he said, taking a bite of his eggs and smirking. Bailey continued to ignore her and consumed the eggs in an instant. "I don't care what Brian thinks of you. You're still an asshole. I'm glad Michelle broke up with you." She turned and walked out the kitchen door. Sean locked the door behind her. "Bailey, I don't think she likes us." Sean cleaned up the kitchen and went back upstairs. Brian was still asleep. He could hear him sawing logs from the hall. Sean entered his own room, put on a t-shirt and sweatshirt and leaned on the bed to put on socks and running shoes. Bailey lay on the rug, watching. "Want to go for a walk?" Bailey jumped up and started bouncing. She charged downstairs towards her leash. Sean started for the stairs and was halfway down when he heard Brian in the hall. "Where are you going?" "Where's your friend?" he asked in a half-sleepy, half-hungover voice downstairs. "You lucky dog. She is super hot. Stacy hated her," Brian said, not knowing Jennifer was assaulted on the front porch and was getting the hell out of Pittsburgh at that very moment. "Go back to bed. I am going running. I'll be back in time for the game." What the hell is he talking about? Sean thought. Really? Take it easy. You'll get to run plenty today, Brian replied. Don't worry. I'll be fine. Sean bounded down the remaining stairs and grabbed Bailey's leash. He stuffed $5 in his shorts and went out the front door. Brian's Charger was parked midway up the drive. He loved having it parked there. Keeps bad people away, he thought. You ready to run? He asked Bailey, and they both took off full speed across the street. Sandy already had her shoes laced up. Standing up quickly, she suddenly felt sick. She made it to the bathroom and threw up most of the last night's meal. She flushed the toilet, swished some mouthwash, and got going. She didn't have time to feel sorry for herself. Leaning in the corner of Sandy's living room was a red Cannondale mountain bike. She had given up trying to keep up with Sean on foot. The bike was better. The pack attached to the seat also was a great place to keep her gun. The iPhone attached to the handlebars nicely. She popped the bike up on its rear wheel and rolled it down the stairs. She opened the door to see Sean and the dog running up St. James. She was still wearing her tights and sweatshirt. She figured the redhead was dead after last night. She stayed blonde. She put on a pair of sunglasses and hopped on the bike. Sean ran to the edge of Fifth Avenue and turned right. He sprinted down Fifth heading towards the University of Pittsburgh. He went flat out. Bailey was at a full sprint. His legs and lungs were burning. Behind him, Sandy worked on keeping up and not getting run over. He passed Central Catholic High School and kept going until he hit the Pittsburgh Athletic Club. He stopped and crossed the 5 or so lanes of Fifth and ran through the fields in front of the Cathedral of Learning. Bailey kept pace. Bill and Bob did not have as much luck. The one-way streets were giving them fits. Sandy was still with Sean, but having trouble. Sean crossed the field and briefly ran up Forbes, turning left on Union. Nice Starbucks on Union, but he wanted to sit in the sun with Bailey at the Starbucks in Shadyside. He turned right back onto Fifth and ran the rest off way up to South Aiken. He stopped at the intersection and trotted across with Bailey. Even as tough as she was, Bailey was getting a little winded. A block behind, Sandy watched Bailey and Sean walk the rest of the way to Starbucks on Walnut. It had 3 nice tables and was right in the sun. None of the Shadyside shops were open yet. He stopped at the first table by the door and looped Bailey's leash around the chair and entered the restaurant. "Hey Sean," the short, dark-haired barista shouted. "Good morning, Monica," he said, walking to the counter. The Starbucks had the normal counter with the assorted mugs and glasses for sale. Starbucks was one of those brands that did everything right. Their merchandising was always well thought out. It was always true to the brand. They never tried anything that was not true. They sold you. They got the impulse buy, but it was never done in cheap way. Always cool. Always in the groove. Take the music for instance. The volume was never too high or too low. It set a mood. They had their own sizes of drinks. They branded sizes. A tall order, but they did it. Some people tried to undo the brand. Some people are too cool to say grande. They had to say medium. What they did not realize was that the power of the Starbucks brand made it cool to say medium. Sean always was amazed at people, mostly men, that did this. Just get your coffee and sit down. In here it's grande. Get over it. There were 2 chairs in the Starbucks window that opened to Walnut Street. He could see Bailey sitting and watching him through the window. "You been running?" she asked, smiling. Monica, a grad student at Pitt, always wore shirts that were too tight and too low cut. She also wore too much eye makeup. "Yeah. A little," Sean smiled. He had sweated through the sweatshirt. She leaned towards him and in a low, sexy voice said, "What can I get you?" How about a triple grande, 3-pump, white chocolate mocha? Plus, a venti ice water for my friend." "Wow, that's new," she laughed. "He always got the same thing. You know there's like 2,000 calories in this." "Not worried." She kept talking while she made the drink. "I saw you at Doc's last night," she said. "Why didn't you say hello? You were leaving. You looked really tired." "Never too tired for you," Sean said, as he smiled at her. "Please. I saw the women that showed up right after you left." "What women?" "They were something else. Not from here, that's for sure. One looked like an Italian model. They talked to Ippolito." "What?" "I'll have to talk with him," Sean said, reaching for his coffee and Bailey's water. Damn it, he thought to himself. He exited as a blonde on a red bike skidded to a stop and leaned her bike against the window. Sean sat down, looking at her. Bailey did too. Bailey pressed herself against Sean's leg. The hair on her back was up. Sean put the cup of water down for the dog, but Bailey ignored it. She was watching a woman and ice bike, Sean said. Sandy took the phone and saddle pack off the bike, said nothing, and entered the Starbucks. Sean looked at Bailey. Do I stink or something? Bailey just looked at him. He smelled fine to her. She's kind of hot, Sean thought to himself. Bailey finally started drinking out of the cup. Finishing, she laid down under Sean's legs that were up in the chair on the other side of the table. He leaned back in the chair. The sun was full on his face. Sandy figured Sean was still clueless and decided to chance being this close. She walked up to the counter. Grande black coffee. Sure thing, Monica said. Sandy paid, took her coffee and a copy of the New York Times and moved to the seat by the window. She was literally 3 feet from Sean. She looked at his long tan legs stretched out on the chair in front of him. The muscles in his legs were rippling. Running like Alienatic will do that to you. She went back to her paper across the street. Sandy's backup watched. I am getting sores on my ass, Bill said to Bob. Just be patient. I can feel something is going to happen. She's going to fuck up. Look at her. She's lost it. He is going to make her. If you need motivation, go look at your bank account, Bob said. True. Good point, Bill replied. When she does fuck up, I am going to put a bullet in her pretty little head, Bob said menacingly. Wow. That's some hostility. I am sick of her pushing us around. Bob said, nodding in her direction. Fine with me. Just remember that you are not dealing with a Girl Scout. She could just as easily kill us. Whatever, Bob said with growing frustration in his voice. You had better get your head back on straight. Shit. She can read our minds for all I know. Let's avoid a confrontation, Bill said, ending the discussion. Sandy pulled out the international section of the Times. She scanned the headlines. Middle East. Shootings. Bombings. She was sick of it. Below the fold, in the bottom right corner, was a report out of Saudi Arabia. Apparently, there had been an accident at sea off the coast of France. A prince had drowned while swimming near Cannes. She skimmed the article. She knew the truth. She looked out the window at Sean. Just sitting there in the sun. His dog next to him. Oblivious. Happy, and as always, having a great time. She took a sip of the coffee. Sean looked down at Bailey and caught the blonde looking at him through the window. He smiled to himself. He looked at his coffee cup. Monica had drawn a little picture on his cup like she always did. How does Starbucks get such good people? He leaned over to check out Sandy's bike. Sandy saw him. She didn't care. She had her gun. Sandy took a second sip of the coffee and did something on impulse. Impulsive action was something rare for her. She was a person who thought things through. She always knew all the angles. What she did made Bob and Bill's jaws drop. She got up from her seat and walked outside. Hi, can I sit down with you? She asked Sean. Several things happened at once. Sean shot straight up in his chair. Bailey popped up and pressed herself to Sean's side. A low rumble erupted from her throat. Quiet girl, Sean whispered to Bailey. Sure. Sean said, motioning to the chair he had his feet in. Thanks. I saw you were looking at my bike. Do you ride? Sandy placed her coffee and bike pack on the table. She left her hand on it. The gun was inside. Yeah, I used to ride a lot. I have a red Cannondale too, but nothing like your bike. This is the new Trigger Carbon, isn't it? Sean said, looking at the bike next to the table. It is. I love it. My name is Sean, by the way, he said, extending his hand. I know who you are, she said, taking his hand and releasing it. Sean paused. She had really disarmed him. He stared at her blankly. Bailey had not blinked since Sandy had come to the table. It's on your cup, she said, pointing at his cup. Monica had put his name on it. Oh. Right. The cup, he smiled and ran his hand through his sweaty brown hair. You live in Shadyside? Sean asked. No. Oakland. I am in grad school at Pitt. I am working on my master's. That's nice, but you know there's a much better school right down 79, Sean said, looking for a reaction. He got one. Sandy knew him backwards and forwards. I am not interested in going to school with hillbillies. She smiled and took a sip of her coffee. So far her impulse was right. She was having fun. She kept an eye on the dog out of the corner of her eye. The dog knew who she was and did not like her now. That's not nice, he said, laughing. Where did you go to undergrad? Yale, she said flatly, which was true. She has studied political science, probably the only truth that had come out her mouth in months. Never heard of it, Sean said, taking a sip of his drink. I am not surprised, she said, pointing at the flying WV on his sweatshirt. He smiled a big smile and started to stand. She put her hand into the bike pack on the butt of the Glock. You never told me your name. No, I didn't, she smiled. He ran his hand through his hair again. If you are interested, there's a lacrosse game down the road at Shadyside Prep. It starts at noon. There's a post party at Doc's right afterward. It will be a good time. He tightened his hold on Bailey. She had been anxious ever since the girl had sat down. No thanks. I don't like lacrosse players. She took another sip of her coffee and tried not to smile. Could have fooled me. See you there, Sean said, as he turned and started walking back home. Sandy could feel her face blush. She reached into the pack and picked up her iPhone and hit redial. She tossed her ponytail to the right and put her feet up in the chair where Sean had been sitting in. What the hell was that? Bob asked, half screaming. Sandy turned her head and glared at him. Part of the job, she said. The hell it was. Look. You guys do. You do what I tell you. You don't think. Start your fancy truck and set up surveillance at Shadyside Prep, she growled. How do you know that's where he will be? Because I am doing my job. Idiot, she thought, as she hung up the phone. The Marines pulled out off the spot and headed out. She stood and watched them go. The pack in her hand was heavy with the Glock it carried. She thought there might be a couple rounds in there with the words "reckon" on them. She attached the pack to the bike saddle and took off. She needed to hit the alley behind the duplex before Sean saw her. I am sick of this shit. Any day now. I can feel it. We are going to get the nod to remove both of them. I can't wait, Bob said. Bill did not respond. Sean and Bailey were taking their time heading home. He looked at Bailey. Why so uptight, girl? She seemed nice enough. A little bit of a tease, but nice. If he only knew. Sean returned to the house, entered through the kitchen door and found Brian already dressed for the game. It was 10 a.m. Bailey greeted Brian and he bent down to scratch her ears. A morning, dummy, Sean said to Brian as he opened the fridge, took a liter bottle of water from the middle shelf, twisted that cap off and started downing the water. Brian leaned against the counter. You thirsty? Brian said as he turned and took a plate from a cabinet and placed a piece of pizza on it. Sean looked at the pizza. We have pizza? Oven still hot? No, I have pizza. Come on, Sean said, reaching back into the fridge and pulling out the pizza box. You know you are just going to waste it. Without waiting for an answer, he took 3 slices out and put them in the Viking range. Wow. You are really putting it away. I see you had 8 eggs this morning. I will slip the bill under your door. I am good for it, Sean said, downing the rest of the water. I know you are. I am heading over to the field in about 45 minutes. You want to go? I need to bribe the groundskeeper. Brian had already given plenty of money to Shadyside Prep. He went there from the time he was in preschool all the way through high school. The lower school was 3 blocks away from the house and sported a beautiful field. The upper school was in Fox Chapel. An important alum, the school allowed Brian and the team use of the field, but Brian still liked to give the grounds team some money. He knew how hard they worked. Sure. We taking your car? Sean asked as he removed the semi-hot pizza from the oven. No, we are taking your Jeep. I don't want your dirty shit in my car. Sean shrugged and bit into the pizza. Brian went into the living room. Sean went to the fridge and took out a second bottle of water. He opened it and took a long drink. His head still hurt. It had for several days. He looked for Tylenol in the drawers in the kitchen. Finding some, he took 2 and washed them down with the water and wolfed down the pizza. He joined Brian in the living room. Brian was watching College Game Day with his feet up. Bailey sat down beside him. The front door was open, filling the room with plenty of cool, Pittsburgh, Saturday morning air. I put your stuff in the back of the garage. You'll need to move the Jeep to get back there, Brian said, as he turned back to the TV. Thanks. I'll be right down. Sean went up to his room, which was directly at the top of the stairs. He opened the top drawer of his dresser and found a pair of Under Armour compression shorts and a cup. He opened the second drawer down and found his old Pittsburgh Lacrosse Club shorts. They were black with a gold stripe. Just like everyone in town, the team wore black and gold. From the same drawer, he pulled out a sleeveless Under Armour compression shirt. He slipped out of his running attire and shorts and got dressed. He put his sweatshirt back on, slipped on his sandals. He looked in the mirror. His hair was wild. His solution? Covering it with a stocking cap. I need a haircut, he said to himself. Back downstairs, he stopped to watch part of College Game Day. Mark May was ranting about how weak Notre Dame was. Lou Holtz was arguing the opposite. May hated WVU. Sean, in turn, detested May. They had never met. However, he had met Lou Holtz at a convention. Holtz did not slip in and out of the convention. Rather, he walked right in through the front door and stopped and talked to everyone until it was time to take the stage. That had always impressed Sean. We have the week off, right? Sean asked. Right. Week off, Brian mumbled. Sean walked past the couch and into the kitchen. I'm going to get my stuff. Come get me when you are ready to go, Sean said. Cool, Brian said, half paying attention. Sean whistled. Bailey jumped off the couch and ran after Sean. He pushed open the kitchen door, which opened onto the deck. The deck was built around an ancient tree. A medium-height rail surrounded the deck and opened to the driveway. Sean took 3 steps down onto the driveway and over to the garage. Sean grabbed the handle to the door and lifted it. Inside was his Jeep. To the right, under a cover, was Brian's black E63. Across the street, Sandy cursed under her breath. The garage did not have a camera. She looked out the window, but could not see him. With everything that had transpired over the last 2 weeks, she needed to stay close to him, now more than ever. Think. She looked over at the bike. The Jeep was a red 95 Wrangler with a bikini top. Aside from the mud-terrain tires Sean had slapped on the Jeep, it was pretty much stock. The full top had been thrown away months ago. He had also removed the doors. He thought it looked cool. He put his hand on the roll bar as he squeezed between the Jeep and the unfinished wall of the garage. The garage had an old musty smell. Dead leaves. Oil. Old cans of paint. All three combined for a thick nostalgic smell that Sean liked. He slid into the driver's seat. Bailey jumped in the passenger seat. "I have a bad feeling this is not going to start," he said to Bailey as he turned the key. He just left the keys in the Jeep now. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. He put the Jeep in neutral. Bailey looked at the Jeep and back at him. "Stay, girl." He got out of the Jeep, moved around to the front and started pushing. The Jeep rolled out into the sun and he quickly ran around, jumped in, and stopped it from rolling too far. He went back into the garage. On a workbench that was never used was a battery charger. He plugged it in, popped the hood and attached the cables. The gauge on the charger told him the battery was not shot. In the back of the garage he found his old Nike cleats, his helmet, gloves, and D-stick. He loved the stick. It had a titanium shaft, but what he loved was the old Brine MD head. It was stiff as a board. He put his gear in the back seat and then went back into the garage. On the workbench was a beat-up CD player. He popped open the lid and looked down at the CD. Bailey stayed in the Jeep. She was still sitting in the front seat. She thought she was still going for a ride. "There's my war album," he said out loud. He picked it up and looked at it and put it back in the player. "Let's see if this works." He hit play and New Year's Day came through the small speakers loud and clear. He looked back at his Jeep. "Great, this piece of shit CD player works, but my Jeep doesn't," he said to himself. An old pull-up bar was screwed into one of the beams. He jumped up and started doing pull-ups. He did them to the rear, pulling himself up until the bar touched the back of his neck. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26, 27. His forearms started quivering and failed. He fell to the ground, but caught himself. "Damn it!" He looked back up at the bar, shook out his arms and started again. 5, 10, 15. His arms gave out again, his hands were torn. He had ripped through the calluses and they were bleeding. Across the street, Sandy decided to chance it again. The two Marines were already at the field. She took the bike out the back of the duplex and turned out of the alley onto Pembroke. She rode to the corner and looked at Sean's house. She could see Brian glued to the TV. She took a deep breath, pedaled across the street and into the driveway towards Sean in the garage. She heard the sounds of U2 coming from the garage. Sean had found gardening gloves and was back up on the bar. Now he was hanging and pulling his knees up to his chest. Sweat was dripping onto the floor. Sean saw her, smiled and dropped to the floor. The glove on his right hand was stained with blood. Bailey heard the bike and let out a menacing growl. Sean ran over and picked up his dog. "Let me get her inside," he said, carrying Bailey to the kitchen door and pushing her inside. Sandy stopped and leaned her bike against the Jeep. Sean turned and bounded off the deck onto the driveway. Sandy was leaning against the Jeep, her blonde hair aglow in the sunlight. She was wearing her capri tights, which accentuated her long, tan legs. "Sean noticed you stalking me?" he asked, pulling the gloves off and walking into the garage. Sandy followed him. "No," she said softly, looking around inside the garage. She saw the puddle of sweat under the pull-up bar. She knew why he was working out like a fiend. "I was riding my bike by and caught you out of the corner of my eye. You know it's okay if you want to stalk me." "I'd really be flattered," he smiled at her. His hands were on his hips. She took a step towards him and it was then she realized she did not have her gun. She panicked for a moment, and then stopped and looked at Brian's car to hide her uneasiness. He walked over to the CD player. "Let me turn this off," he said, looking at her. "No, please leave it on." "I love this album," she answered. "You got it." "That's some car," she said, walking toward the front of the Benz. She lifted up the cover slightly. "I love it, but my buddy won't let me near it." "That's too bad. I sure would like a ride in it sometime," she said, turning around to him quickly. He had moved a step closer. She was flirting. She knew she had to stop. "I could steal it." "You look like you might need a thrill." "Isn't your friend a cop?" "How did you know that?" he said, looking surprised. "That's his car, isn't it?" she said, pointing at the Charger on the street. She was quick. "Yale does that for you. How do you know it's not mine?" he said quickly. "Ha." She started laughing. "What's so funny?" Sean said, a bit wounded. "You're not the cop type." "Far from it." She laughed again. She took a look around the garage again and saw his old bike hanging from the rafters. "That the bike you were talking about?" He looked up. "Yeah. I used to go everywhere on it. I haven't ridden in a while." "Wow, unsuspended." "That must be tough," she said, looking up at the front fork. "Yeah, the tubes on the thing beat you up pretty bad." "Pretty stiff. I bought it from a guy who was graduating. He said he wanted it to go to a good home." He did not take his eyes off her. There was something about her. She liked his music. She liked his old mountain bike, but he doubted she liked Bailey. 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. "Maybe we can go riding sometime," she said, exiting the garage and slowly walking towards her bike. "I would like that." "You know, you never told me your name." "You can call me Sandy," she said, turning her bike around and getting on. She leaned over on one foot, to the left away from the Jeep. The bike was worth twice what the Jeep was, he thought as he watched her. "I like that. Sandy. You look like a Sandy. I suppose. You coming to the game?" "The party," he said, as she started to pedal away. "Maybe," she shouted, going down the drive. "Definitely," she muttered to herself. From his chair in the living room, Brian caught a glimpse of Sandy as she turned out of the driveway. "Wow," he thought. He got up and walked into the kitchen. It was time to go. He looked out the window and saw Sean at the pull-up bar. He heard the music. Sean was listening to the whole album over again. "Who was that?" Brian asked, entering the garage. Sean stopped doing pull-ups and just hung from the bar. Blood was running down his forearm. "Who?" "You know who." "The girl on the bike." Brian then noticed the blood. "Jesus, Sean! Get down. You are killing yourself." "No big deal," Sean said. "The girl or the blood," he said, and grabbed Sean's glove-covered hand. "The blood," Sean said, as he took off the gloves, revealing his torn skin. He turned on the hose on the side of the garage to wash out the cuts. "It's Tung. She's a big deal. I met her at Starbucks. She sat down with me. Wouldn't tell me her name, and then she just showed up here," Sean continued. "So now you can't even get coffee without being attacked. Bless your heart. You never told me what happened last night with Jennifer." Brian said nothing. "She never called." "Bullshit. I sent her over here. She showed up at Doc's." "Damn it. I thought that was who Monica was talking about this morning," Sean said. "Probably. Nobody else looks like that around here, except maybe that blonde that just rode out of the driveway." "She never showed?" "That's weird. She was practically drooling at the thought of you." "Really?" Sean asked, looking at his hands. "Yeah, but she was a no-show." "Your loss, dummy." Brian had his hands on his hips. His cleats were already on. He was looking at Sean. He was concerned. "You really need to go inside and wrap those hands, or you can't play." Sean shrugged his shoulders and picked at his hand. "What's wrong with the Jeep?" Brian said, finally noticing the battery charger won't start. "We need to take the Benz," Sean said, nodding to the car under the cover. "Let me see." He walked over and got in the driver's side of the Jeep and turned the key. It roared to life. "Nothing wrong here." He got out, left-eyed running, and disconnected the charger. "Son of a..." Sean mumbled, "Come inside and get cleaned up. We need to leave in about 5 minutes." Sean's back felt tight from the pull-ups. He wasn't worried. He recovered pretty fast these days. Brian tossed him some gauze and athletic tape. Sean started wrapping his hands. When he was finished, he opened the fridge and took out a bottle of water. He grabbed an apple from the counter and went back outside. Bailey had gotten out of the house and was sitting in the passenger side seat again. Sean put the water and apple on the seat so he could lead her back inside. He gave her a hug and went back outside with Brian. He had loaded his equipment in the back, plus a duffel bag which no doubt contained his radio and other police stuff. Sean slid into the driver's seat and waited while Brian closed the garage. Sean backed out of the driveway and headed for the field. Sean turned into the parking lot and rolled up to the edge of the chain-link fence that enclosed the field. At the far end of the field, there was an older man inspecting the grass while walking towards them. Brian waved at him and jumped out of the Jeep, rummaging through his duffel for an envelope. "That your bribe?" Sean asked. He was kidding. Brian was very kind and always took care of the folks he felt needed it or those who helped him. "Just something for Tony and his wife. He is a huge Pens fan. I am giving him my season opener tickets. Grab our stuff, will you?" Brian said, snapping the envelope on the seat of the car. Sean knew there were more than just tickets in there. Brian was like that. He would probably end up giving everything away before he died, sure. Sean got out, picked up the equipment and the duffel and followed Brian onto the field. He was already talking to Tony. Tony hugged him. Sean could tell Brian was smiling and thanking him. Sean dumped their equipment on the sideline nearest the street and sat down on the grass. The shady side prep field was easily the best they played on all year. Rich, deep green grass. The kind that actually is not too bad to fall on. Across the field, just beyond the bleachers, was the school. Ringed by old trees, it had an Ivy League look to it. Brian approached. "You want to toss it around a little?" Brian asked, picking up his stick. Brian had practically been born with a stick in his hand. He attended camps across the country. He could have played at Syracuse, Hopkins, or UNC, but he wanted to go to WVU like his grandfather. He ended up playing club lacrosse for 4 years in Morgantown. He played for a pro team for a few months as well. He dominated the men's club level and had a great time and never regretted his decision to go to WVU. "Sure, I am really rusty." Sean got up, picked up the D-stick, and jogged onto the field. Brian zipped one to him. Sean snatched it without effort and sent it back to Brian. "Wow. I would not call that rusty," Brian said as he moved to his left and flipped the ball back over his shoulder. 10 minutes quickly passed and the rest of the team started to trickle onto the field. They were all happy to see Sean, which surprised him. Everyone asked where he'd been and what he had been up to. "Sean, I missed you. Without you here, I am the biggest goon," said Tom Ryan, one of the team's attack men. Tom had gone to WVU with Brian and Sean and had been their roommate off and on. A little bit shorter than Brian, Tom lived in Pittsburgh and worked for a large PR firm doing political stuff. Sean shook his hand. "Come on, buddy, you'll always be the biggest goon to me," Sean said, poking Tom in the midsection with his stick. The team began warming up in a very UN-organized fashion. Some guys took it seriously and tried to get drills going, but without much success. A handful of cars pulled into the lot. The Harrisburg squad had arrived. "Brian," Sean said, nodding towards the lot. "Your friends are here." Brian jogged over and met the Harrisburg guys and pointed over to the other sideline. "Thanks for having us, Brian," said Andrew Foster, the head of the Harrisburg club. "We going to docks after?" Most guys played simply for the social aspect, you know it. "We have a keg for the teams." "My man," Andrew said, as he was slapping Brian's back. Not everyone was happy. Steve Vaughn, a Harrisburg mid-die, hated the Pittsburgh group, but mostly he hated Sean. There was bad blood. Vaughn, unlike Sean, was a former D1 midfielder at Duke. He was big time, or at least thought he was. "I see that asshole, Garrison, is back," Steve said to Andrew as he was pulling his gloves out of his bag. Andrew turned and got in Steve's face. "Look, I don't want to fight. I want to play and then drink a lot of beer." "Just call it," Andrew said. Steve pushed him back. "Yeah, sure." The referees arrived. Brian announced that they would start in 30 minutes. Sean got up and jogged across the field. He reached the other sideline and hunkered down and ran backwards, turning left, then right every 10 yards. Arriving at his sideline, he stopped and sprinted back to the other side, starting the whole process again. Tom walked up to Brian. "What's he doing?" Tom asked, still watching Sean running. Brian said, pulling on his shoulder pads. "I see that. This is a guy who could barely run 100 yards a year ago. Change of attitude, I guess," Brian said, reaching for his arm pads. "Hey, is he going to keep his mouth shut?" Tom asked, looking at the Harrisburg guys who were also watching Sean. "Yeah, I talked to him." "No problem." As the words came out of Brian's mouth, Sean was approaching the other sideline. Steve was standing there. "Hey, Steve," Sean said, as he approached the sideline. "I thought you were off the team, Garrison." Steve sneered. Sean stopped and turned to head back to other side. "I was, but they brought me back. I specialize in beating up eunuchs like you." Sean smiled and ran back the other way. One of the Harrisburg guys grabbed a handful of Steve's shirt and pulled him the other way. "Let it go," the teammate said. Both turned and went back to the group. "I'm going to earhole that bastard," Steve said to himself. He glared at Sean over his shoulder. Stacy and Michelle had arrived and were walking from their car to the bleachers. Brian waved at them. They waved back. "Stacy, I don't want to be here," Michelle said to her friend. Michelle was around 5 feet 9 inches with long jet black hair and dark eyes. She had on a pair of shorts that showed off her caramel-colored legs. Her mother was Japanese and her father African American. She was a combination of the best of both of them. She rowed at WVU and still rowed when she could down Allegheny River with the Three Rivers Rowing Club. As much as she loved the water, she loved books more. Her heart was in the classroom. An outstanding student, she went to Johns Hopkins for medical school and was now at UPMC. She wore a gray Hopkins sweatshirt. "Come on. It will be fun. There's a party afterwards," Stacy pleaded. Stacy had on jeans and V-neck sweater. They both settled in the bleachers behind the team. Sean was standing next to Tom looking around. "Who you looking for, buddy?" Tom said, trying to see a girl. Sean said absently, "Michelle is back there," Tom said, squinting in the sun, looking at Michelle. "Yeah, I know. This is somebody else. I met her at Starbucks." "Amazing." "Right away, I felt like I knew her." "You know what I mean," Sean said. Tom looked at him puzzled. "No, I don't." "You sound like a pussy." He paused and looked at Sean. "Hey, can I ask out Michelle?" He stood there waiting for a reaction. Sean was still scanning the stands for Sandy. He felt certain she would go ahead. "I know she turned you down once already." Sean looked at him. Tom stared at the ground, a little embarrassed. "You knew about that?" Tom asked. "Yeah." Probably did not want to catch anything. Sean smirked and walked over to Brian. "Brian, you have a jersey for me?" Brian reached into the duffel and tossed him a gold jersey. "Number 13. He dropped his stick and pulled off the black wool cap. His hair was wet with sweat. He pulled the sweatshirt over his head. Immediately, he heard some whistles. The black sleeveless Under Armour compression shirt he was wearing made his delts and traps pop. His triceps and biceps had multiple veins running across the muscles. His wrists rippled. Through the shirt you could make out Sean's abs, a six-pack. "Wow! Welcome to the gun show!" Tom yelled. "Shut up, Tom," Sean said. Stacy poked Michelle. "What?" she exclaimed, looking at Stacy. Stacy pointed at the field. Michelle leaned forward. She did not say anything. She stared at Sean. "What has he been doing?" she said to herself. "Worth a drive." "Right," Stacy laughed. Sean saw Michelle and nodded in her direction and put his helmet and then his gloves on. She was not worth a wave, Sandy noticed, too, but of course she had been watching him for a long time. She had taken a seat in the bleachers on the Harrisburg side. Sean saw her and pointed his stick in her direction. She did not respond to "Who's that?" Michelle asked Stacy, as she looked at the tall blonde figure across the field. "No telling," Stacy sneered. Sandy had a good view of everything from her vantage point. She had leaned her bike against the fence and was 6 rows up. She was still wearing the same clothes from earlier. She could see Bill and Bob across the street. Others also had a good vantage point. Steve and 2 other guys from Harrisburg walked over and leaned on the fence surrounding the field and looked up at her in the bleachers. "You here to watch us crush those guys?" Steve asked, checking out her long legs. She ignored them. "Hey! You hear me?" Steve asked again. Sandy looked down at them and removed her sunglasses. She stared at him. A cold sensation ran through Steve. He suddenly was afraid. Something in her eyes. "Fuck off," she said. She put her glasses back on and looked forward. "Damn, that feels good," she thought. Steve and the other 2 turned and walked away. "Let's not do that again," one of them said to the other. The refs blew the whistle. "Game time. It's coming to you off the face, buddy," Brian said to him and stopped at the middle of the field for the face-off. Sean jogged to the far sideline and took his position. Steve was standing there. Sean turned and stood next to him. At midfield, Brian looked over at Sean. "Remember what I said?" Brian shouted, "You 2 are a couple fags." Steve snarled, "Thanks, eunuch," Sean replied, and at that same moment the whistle blew. Brian won the face and the ball shot across the field like a laser toward Sean. He caught it and immediately headed for the goal. However, Steve was good, moving into position to check the ball out of Sean's stick. But Sean was not the Sean of old. He moved too fast. In Sean's mind, the rest of the men on the field were moving in slow motion. The speed in which impulses were sent to Sean's brain was unrivaled, providing him with reflexes and speed that was unmatched, on the field and everywhere else for that matter. He gave Steve a face dodge and ran right past him. Steve stood there, mouth open. Brian stopped too. Sean crossed midfield heading for the goal. A Harrisburg defenseman moved up to stop him. Sean made a sharp cut left, shifting the stick to his left. The defenseman stumbled trying to slide over to check Sean. He fired the shot out of the D-stick. It went in top left. It appeared as if the goalie's feet were stuck in concrete. The whistle blew. Sean stopped running and turned to go back to his position. Brian, still at midfield, walked towards his friend. That's some kind of fast. Where has that been? Sean shrugged. If I run all that way, I'm going to shoot, Sean said, with a broad smile. Let's do it again, Brian said, tapping him with his stick. Sean lined up again with Steve. Sean looked at him. They must have taken your legs too, eunuch, Sean taunted. Asshole. I'm going to earhole that prick, Steve mumbled. The whistle blew. Brian won the face again and snapped the ball to Sean. Another laser, right to him. He snatched it out of the air and made a beeline for the goal. He was too fast, too quick for Harrisburg. He crossed midfield again and ran straight for the goal. The shot came out like a rocket. The goalie didn't have a chance. His second goal in less than a minute. Play stopped. Sean stopped to turn and head back to midfield. Steve Vaughan did not stop, however. He had a 14-step jump and cross-checked Sean high, right to the head. The lights went out. Sean's head snapped violently to the left. His feet left the ground. His gloves flew off and he landed on his left side. He did not move. Several things happened at once. Tom Ryan grabbed the back of Steve's jersey and slammed him to the ground. Tom began punching him like he was a human jackhammer. Several Harrisburg players pulled Tom off Steve. Michelle and Stacy covered their mouths with their hands in shock. Sandy stood up. No. No, she said. She feared he was dead. Bill and Bob got out of the truck and walked to the edge of the fence. Sean was still unconscious. Brian ran over to his friend and got down on his hands and knees. You okay, buddy? You okay? Sean did not respond. Brian put his hand on Sean's shoulder. Don't move him. Don't touch him. Michelle yelled as she bounded down the bleachers. She vaulted the fence and sprinted across the field. The players from both teams surrounded Sean. Brian ran back to his duffel and pulled out his radio. This is Officer Brian Ippolito. I need an ambulance and a patrol car at Shadyside Prep. The dispatcher acknowledged the request. Both were on the way. Brian ran back to Sean. Michelle was on her knees trying to bring Sean around. She put her ear to his face mask. Remarkably, his helmet was still on. Thank God. He's breathing, she shouted back to Brain. Sean. Sean. Wake up. Wake up. She got no response. Brian kneeled down next to him. Tom Ryan was rubbing his knuckles, still staring at Steve. The ambulance and the Pittsburgh police arrived simultaneously. The groundskeeper, Tony, opened the fence and let the ambulance onto the field. Two large cops headed straight to Brian. The EMTs jumped out of the ambulance and jogged over to Michelle. They both knew her. What happened? The first EMT asked, bending down, looking at Sean. He was blindsided, hit in the head, Brian answered. The two Pittsburgh cops stood behind him. We need a board. Both EMTs ran back to ambulance and came back with a backboard. Careful. Careful. Michelle cautioned the EMTs. Sandy was still standing. She was dialing her phone and calling a number she dreaded. Robert Waters picked up on the first ring. What is it? Number 2 is down, she said. What do you mean down? He asked with impatience. He is being placed on a backboard. He's unconscious. Waters sighed. This program is shut down. You are to leave Pittsburgh immediately and be in Boston by Monday. He hung up. Sandy looked towards Bill and Bob. They were looking at Bob's phone. Bob put it to his ear and motioned for Bill to get in the truck. It was Waters. Bob and Bill closed the door to the truck. This project has ended. You both are tasked with taking care of loose ends. Make sure number 2 never wakes up. I am sending you help. You need to eliminate Sandy as well. She cannot leave Pittsburgh. I understand, but we don't need help. Bob said you do. She is more dangerous than you know. I am cleaning up this mess before it explodes in my face. He hung up. Sandy looked at her iPhone. She tried to call Bill and Bob. Her phone was now out of service. Shit, she said to herself. She took one more look at Sean being placed on the board and watched Bill and Bob roaring away in the truck. She bounded down the bleachers to her bike. She knew this could have happened at any time. It was one of the reasons she had to watch him so closely. 3 things could happen. 1. Sean would never wake up. He will die. 2. Sean would wake up a vegetable. 3 is what they all feared. Total recall. Sean would wake up. He would remember everything. He would know it all. Instantly, he would become a threat. A threat they would have to neutralize. Or try to neutralize. The EMTs were rolling Sean onto the board very slowly. The group held their collective breaths. Sean was now on his back. He had not regained consciousness. The EMTs did not want to risk removing his helmet. They pulled out small electric drills and began removing his face mask. They got it off and threw it to the side. Tom picked it up and held it, staring at his friend. They lifted Sean and started moving to the ambulance. Michelle followed them and got into the ambulance. They placed him on a gurney, strapped him down and cut away his jersey and compression shirt. Heart monitors were placed on his chest and an 4 was started. Michelle looked at the heart monitor. His heart was strong. His blood pressure looked good. She held his hand. The ambulance started off the field and made the short trip to UPMC. The 2 cops turned to Brian. Both were huge and dwarfed him. They had their hands on their belts. I want you to put the cuffs on that guy, Brian said, nodding toward Steve Vaughn. On what charge? You guys were playing a game, one of them said to Brian. The Harrisburg players were visibly nervous. The Pittsburgh guys wanted their blood assault. What he did transcends this game, Brian said, putting his index finger into the other cop's chest. The 2 cops briefly looked at each other. One shrugged. You got it. The 2 cops walked toward Steve, who was trying to staunch the blood pouring from his nose. His mouth was split open. One of the cops reached behind his back and produced a set of handcuffs. You're under arrest. Assault, the cop said in a booming baritone. Steve put his hands behind his back. He apparently knew the drill. Wait. Wait. I'm a lawyer. What is going on? We were playing a game, a smarmy Harrisburg attackman said, walking forward as they were slapping the cuffs on Steve. The other cop turned towards him. I am sure you are. All you guys are big important punk lawyers or doctors, right? He laughed. The lawyer took a breath. He was a bit of a punk. Look at his face. Who was assaulted? The guy asked. The cops looked at Steve's face and turned towards Brian. What happened to his face? The cop asked, looking Brian's way. We didn't see nothing. Tom Ryan shouted, good enough for me. The cop pushed Steve towards the car. The second cop stopped in front of Brian and whispered, you know this is not going to stick. Yeah, but thanks for doing it, Brian acknowledged. The referees walked towards Brian. We starting back up? One asked. No. That's a bad idea. Brian told them thanks and walked over to Andrew and his squad. Andrew, the game is over. I understand, Brian. I am sorry about today. That guy is not welcome here ever again. Tell your guys that they had better not speed until they hit the city limits, Brian said, pointing at Steve and looking over at the rest of the group. They going to hold him? Andrew asked. No. Send that prick lawyer over there downtown. Will you make a call for us? No. Brian turned and jogged back to the team. I am heading over to UPMC, he said to the Pittsburgh squad, grabbing his stuff and running to the Jeep. We'll be there, Tom shouted. Amazingly, the Jeep started on the first turn of the key. Brian backed up and took off for the hospital. Sandy was on the bike heading back to the duplex. She took an indirect route. Something didn't seem right. Her phone was not working. She dumped the bike a block away and walked between houses until she had a clear view of the duplex. Crouching down behind a hedge, she could see Bill and Bob in the big window on the second floor. There were two more men she did not recognize in another car out front. They were dressed like they were FBI, but they weren't. Sandy knew the look. They were killers. Assassins. Just looking at them, she knew she was in trouble. She sprinted back to the bike and threw the phone into a storm drain. Keeping it would be foolish. They could easily track her. She hopped on the bike and furiously pedaled on back streets heading towards Walnut Street. She stopped briefly in the parking garage behind the shops on Walnut Street and then pedaled to the top of the structure. She sat on the bike. She thought. She thought some more. She realized she was as good as dead if she sat still. What was their next move? What would they do? She knew Bill and Bob were not bright. She didn't know about the other two. She had never seen them before, but she knew the type. They would take care of their easy work first. They would kill Sean. It was easy as long as he was out cold. Then they would try to find her. They would assume she was going back to Boston as she was told. Would they get her at the airport? Would they shoot her from a distance on the way up US 60? They could get her in Boston. She wasn't going to make it easy for them. She coasted down the garage ramp to the exit and turned right. She once again took back streets heading towards Pitt, purposely avoiding Fifth. Coming up behind the Pittsburgh Athletic Club, she coasted, hopped off the bike and put it on her shoulder. Entering the club from the rear, Sandy chose the club because she liked the building and that it also was the perfect safe house. She shared Sean's passion for history and character, and the Pittsburgh Athletic Club did not disappoint. It was built in 1908 by Pittsburgh real estate developer Frank Nicola. Nicola thought of everything when constructing the building. Amenities that were sought after in 1908 and the flexibility to adapt as the times changed. It was home to a bowling alley in the basement, a dinner club on the first floor, a pool on the top floor, a top-of-the-line gym. The floors in between had rooms very much like a hotel. Sandy had one. She walked the bike to the elevator and took it to the fourth floor. She had rented a room when she had returned to Pittsburgh 6 months ago from an assignment. She went through a third party to get it done. No one knew about it. It had cost several $1,000s, but today was the day that investment paid off. She got off the elevator, turned left and found number for 27. She pulled a key out of the bike pack and opened the door. Even thought his was the second time she had seen the room. She was again surprised. She initially expected a youth hostel, but found something closer to the Westin. She rolled the bike in and leaned it against the wall and immediately walked the room to ensure nothing had been disturbed. Satisfied, she walked to the window and looked outside. It was still a nice sunny day. However, she felt a dark cloud was still hanging over her head. She had a plan to make it go away. Between two windows was a queen-size bed. A tasteful comforter and 6 white pillows were at the head of the bed. Small bedside tables were on either side. Opposite was a dresser with a flat-screen TV on top. The bathroom, off to the left side of the room, contained a small single-sink toilet and tub. The usual appointment of 12 individual towels completed the room. The carpet was neutral, but expensive. Her room overlooked the Pitt campus. Against the other wall, next to the bike, was a closet. She walked over to it and opened the door, revealing a safe. On the floor were a 4x4x4 trunk and a black duffel bag. A huge master lock secured the trunk. She pushed the empty clothes hangers aside so she could have easier access to the safe. She entered a code and opened the safe, which held 2 black bags. She put the bags on the bed. Next she lifted the trunk and slung it onto the bed. Then she placed the duffel on bed next to the trunk. She took one of the bags and emptied it. $100,000 US dollars and $50,000 in euros spilled out. She placed the cash on the nightstand. She turned back to the bed and dumped out the second bag. 8 passports spilled out. 2 US, 2 Canadian, 2 French, 2 Russian, along with the passports were matching driver's licenses and credit cards. She stacked them on the nightstand. She unzipped the duffel and looked inside. She took out an empty backpack and tossed it on the floor, and then she pulled out one of the expensive wigs that had been created for her. It was brown. Blonde or brunette, she thought. She took 5 unused burner phones out and put her hands on her hips and looked at them. Pushing back her hair, she looked back out the window for a moment. She picked one of the phones up and dialed a number. She looked at herself in the mirror as she waited for the voice on the other end. "Da," the thick voice answered. In Russian she said, "I need your help." She looked at her feet as she spoke. It felt good to speak in the tongue she grew up with, even if she was rusty. In Russian, he responded, with a bit of concern, "You prepared as I taught you?" "Da," she said, now looking at her face in the mirror, "your Russian is rusty. I will see you where we agreed. Monday. Noon." He hung up. A 17-second conversation. Sandy popped the back off the phone, removed the battery and then removed the SIM card and tossed it in the toilet. She smashed the phone. As she sat on the end of the bed, she decided to make her move early in the next morning around 3 a.m. It was Saturday, just past 2 p.m. She had more than 12 hours to kill. She needed food. She looked at what she was wearing. No chance she was walking into the grill room. The club had very strict etiquette. She picked up the phone and dialed the Trent room. She ordered a Bigelow salad calamari, and a burger, loaded, and 3 bottles of water. She went to the bathroom and washed her face with one of the dozen towels that were provided. Taking her Glock out of her bike pack, she stuck it in the waistband of her pants, opened the door and walked down the hall. She still had her confident stride, but she was noticeably more wary. She took the elevator down to the basement and walked up to the bar. "Hey, I placed an order a minute ago," she said. He nodded, slid a bag across the bar to Sandy, $38. She took the bag and handed him a $50. He just took the money without a second thought. When the elevator opened to the 4th floor, she cautiously moved down the hall. She took out the Glock and held it flat against her leg and put the bag down and opened the door wide, looking inside quickly. Nobody there. She picked up the bag and went inside. She was famished. Manners went out the window. She climbed up on the bed and devoured the meal. Satisfied, she stood up and stripped off her clothes, stepped into the bathroom and turned on the shower. The room started fogging up. She placed the gun on the counter and stepped into the hot water. She put her hands on the wall and let the water run down her back. What she was about to do was going to take all she had, physically and emotionally. She let the water run over her. It would never wash away the guilt. It would never wash away the pain. It would never wash away the blood. She knew what she was going to do would heal her. She felt it in her bones. Sandy stepped out of the shower and toweled off. She took advantage off-road the club supplied. Gun in hand, she snatched a bottle of water off the dresser, opened it and knocked it back. She moved the trunk and duffel off the bed, pulled the shades and lay down in the bed. She needed the rest.